12 days after I walked my daughter Anna down the aisle, she vanished. Her husband said she had left after an argument, and the police found nothing proving otherwise. Then the wedding photographer asked me to study one face in the background of the reception photos. I had seen that woman before in the memorial portrait of the wife my son-in-law said had died 7 years ago. I appreciate you spending a moment with me today. Before we get into this one, do me a small favor. Leave a comment and let me know. Have you ever trusted someone so completely that it scared you afterward? Yes or no? I'd love to hear it. I read more of your words than you realize. A few details in this story have been shaped for storytelling purposes. The message at its core is what truly matters. The detective said the words no father should ever have to hear. We're closing your daughter's case, Mr. Ashford, based on the evidence she left voluntarily. I stood in my living room in Arcadia, the phone pressed so hard against my ear that the plastic edge bit into the cartilage. I am 62 years old. I spent 32 years as a life insurance claims examiner, reading death benefits and accident reports through wire-rimmed glasses until the fine print lived behind my eyelids. I have turned thousands of pages looking for lies. I know what a lie sounds like, and right now, a detective from Phoenix PD was telling you one. Mr. Ashford, the text came from her device, her number, her account. There's no evidence of coercion. She's been gone 3 weeks, I said. My voice was level, the claims examiner's voice the one that stayed flat, while widows cried and adjusters shouted. That text was sent 12 days ago. You're telling me 12 days of silence is enough to close everything? I understand this is difficult, sir, but without evidence of a crime, our hands are tied. The line went dead. I kept the phone against my ear for another 30 seconds, listening to nothing. Because putting it down meant accepting that the entire system designed to find missing people had just decided my daughter did not want to be found. 3 weeks. That's how long it took the whole machinery of justice to decide that Lori, my Lori, had simply chosen to vanish. Lori Ashford, 29 years old. A freelance children's book illustrator whose gentle watercolors had earned her a modest following online and whose trust in people had never once protected her from the wrong ones. She painted rabbits in raincoats and foxes carrying lanterns through snow. She called me every Sunday without fail. She hadn't called in 21 days, and a detective had just told me that was normal. I looked at the wedding photo on the mantel. February light. Desert sun through the windows of a small venue near Tempe. Lori, in a simple dress she'd sewn parts of herself, laughing at something the photographer said. And beside her, one hand on her waist, the other adjusting his cufflink, stood Cyrus Prescott. 36. Private equity fund manager, tailored suits, a voice so measured it sounded rehearsed even when he was ordering coffee. Every room he entered believed he was the most trustworthy man in it. I had watched him charm Lori's friends, her colleagues, her landlord, even the woman at the bakery who made the wedding cake. He charmed everyone. He never charmed me. I remembered the moment I shook his hand at the reception. I squeezed harder than I needed to. "Take care of her," I said. Cyrus looked at me with those inventory eyes, the ones that scanned a room the way an appraiser scans a house, cataloging value. He smiled, practiced, warm enough for the cameras. "I always take care of what's mine," he said. "Not her, mine." I spent the 2 weeks after the wedding telling myself that chill was nothing. Fatherly overprotection. The irrational jealousy every dad feels when his daughter marries a man who is not good enough because no man ever could be. I told myself I was being unfair. That Cyrus was polished, not predatory, confident, not calculating. Then, Lori disappeared. 3 weeks ago, she left the condo she shared with Cyrus in Tempe and never came back. Cyrus called me that night, voice steady, story airtight. She'd gone for a drive to clear her head, he said. They'd had a small argument about finances, nothing serious. He expected her home by morning. Morning came, then another. Then 12 days of silence broken only by a single text from Lori's phone to her best friend, "Don't look for me." 5 words. No punctuation, no emoji, no context. The police read those 5 words and heard a woman who wanted to disappear. I read them and heard something else entirely. I heard 3 decades of fine print. I heard the cadence of a sentence constructed by someone who had never sent a text message as Lori. I set the phone down on the kitchen counter. I walked past the wedding photo, down the hallway, into the study I hadn't opened since retirement. The desk was buried under old trade journals and a retirement plaque I'd never hung. I cleared them off. I opened the bottom drawer where my case methodology notebooks were stacked in order by year. Then I opened a fresh manila folder, wrote my daughter's name across the tab in black marker, and placed the wedding photograph inside. 3 weeks ago, I thought that afternoon in Tempe was the beginning of her happiest chapter. Now I understood it might have been an audition. And my son-in-law had been rehearsing the part long before he ever met her. How many times can a man rehearse a phone call before it stops sounding like grief and starts sounding like a script? I sat at my study desk with the fresh case folder open in front of me and replayed the conversation in my head. Not the detective's call, the other one. The one from Cyrus, 12 days after the wedding, the night my daughter vanished. His voice had been calm, not the shattered calm of a man whose wife had just walked out, but the measured calm of someone reading from notes he'd already edited twice. I had listened to that cadence before, hundreds of times. Every fraudulent death benefit call I ever fielded in 3 decades of claims work carried the same signature: too smooth, too structured, too aware of what the listener needed to hear. She grabbed her keys and just left. Vernon, I tried to stop her, but she wouldn't listen. Then she texted me, "Don't look for me." Those were her exact words. Exact words. He said that. Not roughly or something like exact words, as if precision were a comfort rather than a tell. In my experience, a man who has just lost his wife does not quote her with punctuation. He stumbles. He contradicts himself. He calls back 20 minutes later to correct something he got wrong because his hands were shaking too hard to think straight. Cyrus never called back. He never corrected anything. His account was seamless from the first sentence to the last, and that seamlessness was the loudest alarm I had ever heard. I wrote the word "rehearsed" on the first page of the folder and underlined it. Then I wrote the question that had kept me awake for 9 nights straight. Did she take her sketchbooks? I had asked Cyrus that during the call. There was a pause, not the pause of a man thinking, but the pause of a man caught off guard by a question that wasn't in his script. I didn't check," he said. Lori would sooner leave without shoes than without her sketchbooks. She carried them in a canvas bag everywhere: the grocery store, the dentist, the passenger seat of her car. She sketched while waiting for oil changes. She sketched during phone calls with me, and I could hear the pencil scratching through the receiver. Those sketchbooks were not luggage, they were organs. And her husband of 12 days didn't even know to check whether she'd taken them. That told me 2 things. Cyrus understood Lori's value. He did not understand Lori. I pulled a legal pad from the drawer and started the anomaly list. It's what I would have done at the office, what I did do thousands of times, when a claim crossed my desk and the numbers were too round or the timeline was too tight. I treated my daughter's disappearance the way I had treated every suspicious file for 3 decades. Not because I wanted to, because it was the only language I spoke fluently enough to trust. Anomaly 1, the text message. 5 words, no punctuation, no emoji, no follow-up. Lori texted in lowercase storms, clusters of 3 and 4 messages in a row, trailing off with half-finished thoughts. She never sent a single clean sentence in her life. That text read like a caption, not a conversation. Anomaly 2, the sketchbooks. Still in the apartment when police arrived, Lori without her sketchbooks was like a surgeon without hands. If she had left voluntarily, they would have been the first thing she grabbed. Anomaly 3. The apartment itself. Cyrus had invited the police to search it the day after the text. Invited them. No warrant, no hesitation, no lawyer. The place was spotless, as if he had known they were coming. Fraud is a lot like woodworking. The joins look perfect until you know where to press. And I had spent my entire career pressing. Anomaly 4. Cyrus's emotional flatline. No red eyes in the photos the police took during the welfare check. No missed calls to Lori's phone I checked with her carrier. He reported her missing and then stopped looking for her. What kind of husband stops looking after one text? The kind who already knows where she is. By midnight, I had filled 3 pages. The text, the sketchbooks, the rehearsed call, the spotless apartment, the missing panic. Each one alone could be explained. Together they formed a shape I had seen so many times it had its own section in the claims manual: staged departure, controlled narrative, premeditated exit designed to look voluntary. All those years in insurance had taught me one unshakable truth: no genuine goodbye is ever this clean. And if it wasn't genuine, then someone had written it for her. The call came from a number I didn't recognize. On a Tuesday morning, when I had almost convinced myself that staring at anomaly lists was the same thing as making progress. 3 pages of notes, a folder with my daughter's name on the tab, and no next move. I had spent a week circling the same conclusions: the staged text, the missing sketchbooks, the rehearsed phone call, without finding a single thread I could pull that wouldn't dead end at a closed police file. Then my phone buzzed, and a voice I barely remembered said my name like an apology. "Mr. Ashford, this is Darcy Gallagher. I was Lori's wedding photographer. We met at the venue." Darcy Gallagher, 31 years old, freelance photographer who worked out of a rented studio in Scottsdale. I remembered her at the reception, paint-stained sneakers, camera strap cutting into her neck, speaking in half-finished sentences as though she were still deciding how much of herself to offer the room. Lori had hired her through a friend of a friend because Darcy's portfolio had the kind of soft warmth that matched the watercolor world my daughter lived in. "I was finishing Lori's album," Darcy said. Her voice was careful, the kind of careful that means someone has rehearsed the first sentence but not the rest. "And I found something. I think you need to see it in person." "Can you tell me what it is?" "Not over the phone. It might be nothing." She paused. "But it doesn't feel like nothing." I drove to Scottsdale that afternoon. Darcy's studio was a narrow storefront between a yoga supply shop and a tile showroom, white walls, track lighting, and a desk buried under hard drives and lens caps. She had the raw wedding files open on a wide monitor when I walked in. Hundreds thumbnails. My daughter's face in small square after small square, smiling in desert light. Darcy didn't waste time. She clicked on a frame reception. Wide shot, Lori holding a glass of sparkling water with her free hand resting on Cyrus's arm. Behind them, slightly out of focus, a woman stood near the doorway. "Frame 112, Darcy said. She clicked again. "Frame 139, again. 161, 204, 247, 5 frames. 5 separate moments during the reception. And in every single one, the same woman positioned directly behind Lori. Never interacting with anyone, never holding a drink or a plate, never once smiling. How does a stranger attend a wedding uninvited, position herself in 5 photographs, and never speak to a single person in the room? "She's not on the guest list," Darcy said. "I cross-checked every name Lori gave me. Nobody knows who she is." I leaned closer to the monitor. Frame 247, the clearest shot. The woman was mid-30s, gaunt in a way that spoke of years rather than weeks. Wore a dark dress that didn't match the desert casual tone of the rest of the guests. Her hair was pulled back tight. Her hands were empty and still at her sides. And her eyes were not following Lori. They were fixed on the camera lens. Directly. Unflinchingly. As though she knew that someday someone would sit in this exact chair and scroll through these exact files and need to find her face. "Pull up 247 again," I said. Darcy enlarged it. The woman's expression sharpened on the screen, and I felt something shift in my chest, the same shift I used to feel when a fraudulent claim stopped being a suspicion and became a certainty. I had spent years studying the faces of people hiding something. This woman was not hiding. She was begging to be found. Her expression was not hostility, not curiosity, not the blank pleasantness of a wedding crasher enjoying free champagne. It was warning. The look of someone who had come to leave evidence of her own presence because she knew what was coming and couldn't stop it. She wasn't a guest, I said quietly. She was trying to be seen. Darcy stared at me. By who? By whoever came looking after. I asked Darcy to send me every raw file from the wedding, every frame, every angle, every metadata stamp. She nodded and started the transfer without another question. Some people ask why. Darcy was the kind who understood that why could wait. Driving home through the Scottsdale traffic, I kept seeing the woman's face on the monitor. She hadn't crashed that wedding to celebrate. She hadn't come to cause a scene. She had placed herself behind my daughter 5 separate times and stared straight into the lens. Because she knew that someday, someone would need to find her. And she wanted to make sure they could. I needed to walk into my son-in-law's home and pretend I wasn't already building a case against him. The mystery woman's face had followed me home from Darcy's studio and into 3 sleepless nights. I printed the clearest frame 247 and taped it inside the case folder beside my anomaly list. Then I picked up the phone and called Cyrus. I just wanted to check on you, I said. The words tasted like rust. Father to son-in-law. See how you're holding up. He invited me over without hesitation. That was the second alarm. The first was his voice, still that measured warmth, 3 weeks into his wife's disappearance, steady as a thermostat. The condo in Tempe was exactly as I expected, modern, clean. Surfaces that reflected light like they'd been wiped that morning, gray furniture, white walls. Track lighting aimed at nothing because there was nothing to illuminate. I stood in the doorway and scanned the living room with the same discipline I'd used to walk through a claimant's home during an on-site audit, looking not for what was there, but for what was missing. Everything was missing. Not a single sketchbook, not one watercolor brush, no canvas bag on the coat hook. No colored pencils scattered across the kitchen counter the way Lori left them on every surface she ever touched. The condo looked like a model unit staged for showing, not for living. Cyrus hadn't stored Lori's things because he missed her. He had stored them because the performance required a clean stage. I keep expecting her to walk through that door, Cyrus said, handing me a mug of coffee. His hands were perfectly steady, not a tremor, not a ripple on the surface of the liquid. Have you kept any of her things? I asked, in case she comes back. His smile didn't change. Same calibrated curve, same practiced sincerity. I put them in storage. It was too painful to look at every day. Too painful. He said that while standing in a kitchen so pristine it could have been photographed for a real estate listing. I sipped the coffee and nodded and let him believe I was just a grieving old man looking for comfort. I asked to use the bathroom. He gestured down the hallway without concern. Why would he worry? The police had already cleared the apartment. The case was closed. He had won. The hallway was narrow. 2 doors on the left, bathroom at the end. I walked slowly, an old man's pace, believable. And halfway down, on a small shelf beside a dried flower arrangement, I saw it. A framed photograph, 5 by 7. A woman's face, mid-30s. Dark hair pulled back, cheekbones that cut sharp angles in the soft light. Below the frame, a small brass plate read, "In loving memory." In 3 decades of claims work, I learned that the dead don't come back, but they also don't show up in wedding photographs. The face in the memorial frame was the face from Darcy's camera. The same gaunt structure, the same wide-set eyes, the same expression that had stared through the lens from behind my daughter in 5 separate frames. I was looking at the woman who had crashed Lori's wedding, and according to the brass plate and the dried flowers, she had been dead for 7 years. I steadied my breathing. I walked into the bathroom, closed the door, and stood with my hands on the sink until my pulse dropped below 90. Then I took out my phone and opened the camera. I flushed the toilet for sound cover, opened the door, and photographed the memorial display in 2 quick frames. The shelf, the flowers, the brass plate, the face. "Who's this?" I asked when I returned to the living room, keeping my voice light, casual, the voice of a man making conversation, not collecting evidence. Cyrus glanced toward the hallway. "My first wife," he said. "She passed away 7 years ago. Boating accident on a lake up north. They never recovered her." Never recovered her. No body. A drowning. 7 years ago. "I'm sorry," I said. But sorry was the farthest thing from what I felt. I finished the coffee. I thanked him for his time. I shook his hand at the door and felt the same measured grip from the wedding reception. The grip of a man who controlled every variable, including pressure. Then I sat in my truck in the parking garage for 11 minutes before starting the engine. Cyrus's first wife had been declared dead after a drowning that never produced a body. And 3 weeks before my daughter vanished, that same woman had walked into Lori's wedding, positioned herself in 5 photographs, and stared into the camera as though her life depended on being seen. Dead women don't attend weddings, unless they were never dead at all. I hadn't climbed those stairs above the barber shop on Central Avenue in 4 years, but my knees remembered every one of them. The door at the top still had the same frosted glass panel with the same gold lettering peeling at the edges, Mercer Investigations. I pushed it open without knocking. Boyd Mercer sat behind a desk that looked like it had lost a fight with a filing cabinet papers, coffee rings, 2 monitors displaying nothing, and a half-eaten sandwich on a legal pad. He was 58 years old. Built like a man who used to run but had made peace with walking. And he had spent 26 years sitting across from me at the same insurance company before trading his cubicle for this one-room office that smelled like aftershave drifting up from the barbershop below. We had read thousands of claims files together. We had caught frauds that ran into 7 figures. We never imagined the next file would have my daughter's name on it. "I need your help," I said, and set the folder on his desk. Boyd didn't ask why. He opened the folder and started reading. 3 pages of anomalies. The printed frame from Darcy's camera, the mystery woman standing behind Lori at the reception. And the photograph I had taken in Cyrus's hallway, the memorial display, the dried flowers, the brass plate reading "In loving memory." Boyd held both prints under his desk lamp, tilting them to cut the glare. His eyes moved between the faces, the wedding frame, and the memorial, back and forth. 3 times. "These are the same woman," he said. "Yes." "And you're telling me she's been dead since 2015? "I'm telling you what my son-in-law told me." I sat down in the cracked leather chair across from his desk. "I'm hiring you to tell me what actually happened." Boyd set the photos down and looked at me the way he used to look at me when a claim crossed our desk that was too clean. The look that said we both knew what was coming, and neither of us wanted to say it first. "Vernon, if this goes where I think it goes, you won't just be fighting your son-in-law, you'll be accusing him of something federal. Then it goes federal." He studied me for a long moment. Then he pulled a yellow legal pad from under the sandwich, wiped the crumbs off with his sleeve, and picked up a pen. "Start from the beginning," he said. I gave him everything. The rehearsed phone call, the farewell text, the sketchbooks still in the apartment, the sterile condo, the memorial photo, the 5 wedding frames. Boyd wrote without interrupting, the pen scratching the way Lori's pencils used to scratch through the phone, quick, certain strokes. When I finished, he tore the page off, pinned it to the corkboard behind his monitor, and reached for his phone. "I've got a contact at her carrier," he said. "Let me pull Lori's call records. If someone was reaching out to her before the wedding, it'll show. 3 hours later, we were staring at a spreadsheet on his monitor. 12 weeks of Lori's incoming calls, sorted by frequency. Most of the numbers were familiar friends, clients, my own. But one stood out like a wrong note in a chord. A prepaid number, no registered name, no voicemail, no carrier metadata beyond a Phoenix area prefix. It had called Lori every Thursday evening at exactly 7:18 p.m. for 12 consecutive weeks. Then it stopped. Cold, the week before the wedding. Who calls a woman every Thursday at exactly the same time for 3 months and then vanishes the moment she walks down the aisle? Every Thursday, Boyd said, running his finger down the column. 7:18 p.m., 12 weeks straight. Then nothing. Someone was reaching out to Lori on a schedule, I said, and they stopped exactly when it was too late for her to back out. Or exactly when someone found out they were calling, Boyd said quietly. The room smelled like barbershop aftershave and old paper. The spreadsheet glowed on the monitor. 12 calls. 12 Thursdays. Then silence. No name, no address, no voicemail. Just a prepaid SIM card that somebody used to contact my daughter on a precise weekly schedule for 3 months, then abandoned the week she married a man whose first wife had already died once. If the woman from those photographs was the one making the calls, then she hadn't come to that wedding as a ghost. She had come as a warning. And whatever she had been trying to tell my daughter, she ran out of time. In 32 years of examining death claims, I never once approved a payout without a certificate. So when Boyd started pulling county records on Cyrus's first wife, I expected to find one assigned, stamped document that would tell me how she died, and when and where. Something I could read the way I read every other death document, looking for the lie between the lines. There was no certificate. Boyd ran 3 jurisdictions: Maricopa County, where Cyrus lived, Hennepin County, Minnesota, where the incident reportedly occurred, and 2 neighboring counties for good measure. Nothing. No coroner's report, no medical examiner's finding. No official declaration of death from any authority in any state Boyd could access. What he found instead was a missing person report. Filled 7 years ago at a lake in northern Minnesota, a reported drowning during a boating trip. One witness, Cyrus himself. Search and rescue deployed for 6 days. Divers, sonar, shoreline teams. The lake was deep and cold, and the search was called off when conditions deteriorated. Body never recovered. Case administratively closed. Not resolved. Closed. She was never declared dead, Boyd said, turning his monitor toward me. She was declared missing. A missing person report is an open door. A death certificate is a locked one. Cyrus had managed to cash a check by walking through an open door and convincing everyone it was closed. Then how did he collect? I asked. Boyd pulled up a second document, a court filing from Hennepin County, dated 11 months after the drowning. A petition for presumptive death, filed by an attorney named Gould out of Minneapolis. The petition cited the failed recovery effort, the extreme water conditions, and the absence of any subsequent contact from the missing person. A judge signed the ruling 4 weeks later. No hearing, no contestation, no family member appearing to object. Presumptive death ruling, Boyd said. A judge signed off after the search was abandoned. No body required, just a lawyer who knew the right paperwork. I leaned back in the chair and felt the cracked leather give under my shoulders. I had seen this mechanism exactly twice in my career. Both times, the claimant had staged the disappearance, hired a cooperative attorney, and waited the minimum statutory period before filing for the presumptive ruling. Both times it was deliberate. Both times the insurance company paid. I've seen that trick twice in all my years on the job, I said. Both times, it was fraud. Boyd didn't argue. He pulled up the missing person report and enlarged it on screen. I read the details the way I had read 10,000 similar documents, not for what they said, but for what they didn't say. The reporting party was Cyrus Prescott. He stated he and his wife had taken a small motorboat onto the lake in the early evening. She had fallen overboard. He could not locate her in the water. He returned to shore and called 911. No other witnesses, no other boats in the area, no distress call from the water, just one man's account and a lake that kept its secrets. Let me tell you something about drownings with no body. The water doesn't lie. But the paperwork does if you know which forms to file and which judge to ask. A presumptive death ruling is not proof that someone died. It is proof that someone convinced a court to stop looking. Boyd printed the missing person report and the court ruling and laid them side by side on his desk. I stared at the two documents the way I used to stare at paired claims, the original filing and the payout authorization, looking for the gap between what happened and what was written. 6 days of searching. No body, no witnesses beyond the husband. One attorney filing paperwork before the lake had even been fully dragged. And on the other side of that ruling, according to Boyd's preliminary check, an insurance payout deposited into Cyrus's account barely a month after the judge's signature dried. The pattern was there. Not suspected. Not implied. There drawn in the same clean lines as every staged claim I had ever dismantled. A woman goes into the water. The water gives nothing back. A lawyer files the right forms. An insurance company writes a check. And the man who reported the drowning moves to a new city, finds a new woman, and starts again. I had spent my entire career catching men who turned paper into money and people into numbers. Now I was looking at the same blueprint with my daughter's name penciled into the next blank line. I picked up the phone on Boyd's desk and handed it to him. "Find out how much they paid him," I said, "and which company wrote the check." Boyd made one phone call to a woman he used to share a break room with, and within 2 hours we were staring at a number that made my hands go cold. Her name was Stacy Rowland, a senior claims archivist who had outlasted 3 mergers and 2 relocations at the carrier that insured Cyrus's first wife. Boyd called in a favor he'd been saving for years. She didn't ask why. She pulled the file, scanned the summary page, and emailed it to Boyd's encrypted address while we sat in his office watching the ceiling fan turn. The email arrived at 3:47 p.m. Boyd opened it, read the first line, and turned the monitor toward me without a word. $780,000. Paid 45 days after the presumptive death ruling. Single beneficiary payout. No dispute filed, no secondary review triggered, no flag, no hold, no audit. The check cleared, and Cyrus Prescott walked away from a lake in Minnesota $750,000 richer. With nothing left behind but a missing person report and a memorial frame he would later display in his hallway like a trophy. I read the claim structure the way I had read 10,000 others. And I found 3 red flags in the first 30 seconds, the same 3 I had spent years training junior examiners to catch before they ever approved a payout. First, accelerated filing. Cyrus's attorney submitted the presumptive death petition 11 months after the drowning. The statutory minimum in Minnesota is 1 year for water incidents without recovery. 11 months meant the paperwork was drafted before the waiting period ended. Someone had the petition ready in advance. Second, beneficiary redesignation. 2 months before the drowning, Cyrus changed the policy beneficiary from a family trust to himself directly. In my profession, we had a name for that. We called it premeditation on paper. Third, no independent witness. The only account of what happened on that lake came from Cyrus himself. No other boat, no shore observer, no 911 call from the water. Just one man's voice on a recorded line, calm and detailed, describing how his wife went over the side and never came back up. He changed the beneficiary 2 months before she drowned, I said. That's the first thing we taught new examiners to flag. So someone at that company missed it, Boyd said. Or someone didn't want to find it. Boyd printed the claim summary and pinned it to the corkboard beside the missing person report and the presumptive death ruling. 3 documents. 3 steps in a sequence I could have drawn from memory because I had written the training manual section on exactly this pattern: accelerated filings following unwitnessed water fatalities with no body recovery. I stood at the corkboard and did what I had done 1,000 times at my old desk. I drew the timeline. On the left, 2015. Marriage policy taken out within 6 months. Beneficiary change 2 months before the incident. Drowning, no body. Presumptive death, payout. On the right, 2022. Marriage. And then a gap, the part I hadn't confirmed yet. But I already knew what would fill it because the structure was identical. The man hadn't changed. The method hadn't changed. The only variables were the woman and the dollar amount. I had trained hundreds of examiners to spot this exact sequence. I wrote the manual chapter on accelerated filings. And I never imagined I'd be reading my own daughter's name in the next column. "It's the same sequence. Boyd," I said. My voice was steady, the examiner's voice, the one that stays flat when everything inside is breaking. Marriage, policy, beneficiary change, disappearance. He just changed the numbers. Boyd looked at the corkboard. 2 timelines, side by side, 7 years apart. Same architecture, same man, different woman. "You think he learned from the first one?" Boyd said. I think the first one was practice. The ceiling fan turned overhead. The barber shop below had gone quiet closing time. Boyd's office smelled like old paper and printer ink. And the 2 timelines on his corkboard looked like before and after diagrams from a claims seminar I could have taught in my sleep. Except this wasn't a seminar. This was my daughter. I stared at the gap on the right side of the corkboard, the blank space after marriage where the policy details should go. I didn't know the amount yet. I didn't know the clause. But I knew the shape of what was coming because I had spent my whole career learning to read it. Cyrus Prescott hadn't married Lori because he loved her. He had married her because he had already proven once before that he could make a wife disappear and walk away richer for it. The only question left was how much she was worth to him on paper. Boyd spent 3 days chasing the burner number through every channel he had, and every single one came back empty. The question of how much Lori was worth on paper would have to wait. First, we needed the woman who had tried to warn her. The burner sim was our only thread, and Boyd pulled it hard. He traced the number to a prepaid card purchased at a gas station in Flagstaff. Cash transaction. No ID required. The store's security camera recycled its footage every 21 days, and the purchase was 3 years old. There was nothing to recover. The phone was activated once. Boyd said, scrolling through the carrier's activation log. Used exclusively on Thursday evenings for 12 consecutive weeks, then powered off and never turned on again. So it was dedicated. One phone, one purpose, one target. And whoever used it knew exactly how to disappear afterward. I sat in Boyd's office and felt the floor shift under me. The burner was our strongest connection to the woman from the wedding photographs, the woman from the memorial frame. The woman who had been declared dead and then walked into my daughter's reception and stared into a camera like her life depended on being seen. And now that thread was severed. A dead SIM card purchased with cash in a city 2 hours north of Phoenix. Untraceable, unrecoverable, gone. There is a particular kind of helplessness that comes from knowing you are right and having nothing to prove it with. No witness, no recording, no trail. Just a father's instinct that the law does not accept as evidence. "We need another angle," I said. Boyd was already typing. "I'm pulling Lori's financial records. If Cyrus set up the same structure he used before, there'll be a paper trail on her side too. Policies, accounts, beneficiary filings. Something with his fingerprints on it." He worked through the afternoon while I sat across from him reading the first wife's claim file for the 3rd time, looking for anything I might have missed. I didn't find anything new. The file was clean. Not clean like thorough clean, like scrubbed. Someone had done this before and learned from the experience. At 6:40 p.m., Boyd's monitor chimed with an incoming database alert. He opened it, read the first 3 lines, and went very still. Vernon. I looked up. Boyd's face had changed. Not shock. He was too experienced for shock. It was the expression I had seen him wear twice in 26 years. Both times when a routine audit turned into something that required calling the fraud division before lunch. He turned the monitor toward me. A life insurance policy, issued 5 days after Lori's marriage certificate was filed. The carrier was a mid-tier company out of Dallas, not the same one that paid on the first wife, a different firm entirely. Cyrus had learned not to repeat carriers. The coverage amount was $2.4 million. Sole beneficiary, Cyrus Prescott. 5 days. He filed for coverage on my daughter 5 days after saying his vows. Most men are still writing thank you cards at that point. Cyrus was pricing his wife's life at 7 figures. Boyd printed the summary page and set it on the desk between us like it was something that might detonate. $2.4 million, he said. Issued 5 days after the marriage certificate. Sole beneficiary, no cosigner. Application signed digitally, meaning Lori may not have even known it existed. She didn't know, I said. I was certain of that the way I was certain of gravity. Lori trusted people. She trusted Cyrus. She would have signed a digital form if he told her it was for mortgage pre-approval or health coverage or anything else that sounded routine. She would not have read the fine print because she had never needed to. That was my job. That had always been my job. And I had failed. Vernon, this isn't a life insurance policy, Boyd said quietly. This is a price tag. I held the printout under his desk lamp and read the number again. $2,400,000. 3 times what he collected on the first wife. Same structure, sole beneficiary, no independent medical exam, accelerated underwriting. He had used a different carrier, a different state, a different woman. But the architecture was identical, the same blueprint drawn by the same hand. This wasn't a marriage that fell apart. This wasn't a woman who decided to disappear. This was a contract drafted 5 days after the ceremony, funded by a premium Cyrus paid out of an account Lori probably never saw, and designed to convert my daughter from a person into a payout. I set the printout down and looked at Boyd. "What's the payout clause?" I asked. "What triggers the disbursement?" Boyd was already scrolling. "Give me the night," he said. "I'll have the full policy language by morning." I drove home in the dark, and the number followed me the entire way. It was past midnight when I found the paragraph that turned everything from urgent into impossible. Boyd had emailed the full policy document at 11:15 p.m. 14 pages of legal language dense enough to bruise your eyes. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee going cold and read every line the way I had read thousands of policies before, slowly, carefully, with a pencil in my hand and a legal pad beside me for notes. Most of it was standard boilerplate, coverage terms, exclusions, premium schedules, the kind of language that puts normal people to sleep and keeps claims examiners employed. Then I reached Section 14B, Accelerated Benefit Provision. I read the words and felt the kitchen shrink around me. The clause was 3 sentences long. It stated that the full death benefit, the entire $2.4 million, would become eligible for disbursement if the insured party was confirmed deceased or officially missing within 60 calendar days of policy activation, provided no legal dispute had been filed against the claim prior to the eligibility window closing. 60 days. I set the pencil down and did the math on the legal pad. The policy activated February 8th, 5 days after the wedding. Lori vanished February 15th. Today was April 5th. Day 56. 4 days. I had 4 days before the window closed and the payout became legally collectible. 4 days to find my daughter, prove a federal crime, and file a legal dispute against a man who had already done this once and walked away with $750,000. 4 days to dismantle a scheme that had been engineered months before Lori ever put on a wedding dress. I called Boyd. He answered on the second ring. He had been waiting. Section 14B, I said. Accelerated benefit provision. 60-day window from policy activation. When does it close? April 9th. Silence on the line. The kind of silence that happens when two people who have spent decades reading fine print both arrive at the same conclusion at the same time. He doesn't need her dead, Boyd. He just needs her gone long enough for the paperwork to clear, and we're almost out of time. Can you file a dispute before the window closes? I can file, but a dispute without evidence gets dismissed in 48 hours. I need something the carrier can't ignore. A formal fraud complaint, a law enforcement referral, something with teeth. The police close the case. Then we reopen it. Or we go over it. I hung up and stared at the policy documents spread across my kitchen table. 14 pages. Hundreds of clauses. And buried in the middle, 3 sentences that explained everything. Why Cyrus had married Lori so quickly, why he had filed the policy 5 days after the ceremony, why he had been so calm when she disappeared. He wasn't waiting for her to come home. He was waiting for a date on a calendar. How do you explain to a judge that your son-in-law married your daughter for a 60-day window, that the police closed the case, and the only evidence is a pattern no one else has bothered to look for? That a memorial photo on a hallway shelf and 5 frames from a wedding photographer prove that a dead woman is alive and trying to warn people? You can't. Not in 4 days. Not through normal channels. I stood up from the table and walked to my study. The case folder was on the desk where I had left it, thicker now, heavier with printouts and notes and timelines pinned together with paper clips. I opened it and laid everything out in sequence. The anomaly list, the wedding photographs, the memorial match, the burner phone records, the payout on the first wife, the policy on Lori. 6 pieces, each one circumstantial on its own. Together they formed the clearest fraud chain I had seen in a career of reading claims. But clarity is not the same as proof, and proof is not the same as time. I picked up my pencil and wrote the number on the back of my left hand, pressing hard enough to leave a mark. 4. 4 days before a clause buried in 14 pages of fine print would turn my daughter's disappearance into a completed transaction. Cyrus hadn't panicked when Lori vanished because he wasn't grieving. He counting. The same way I was counting now, except he was counting toward a payday. And I was counting toward a deadline that would erase my daughter on paper the way the lake in Minnesota had been meant to erase his first wife in water. I closed the folder, set my alarm for 5 a.m., and lay down on the couch without turning off the kitchen light. 4 days. The number pulsed on the back of my hand like a second heartbeat. While I was counting days, Cyrus was making a move I never saw coming, and he made it before I had finished my morning coffee. I woke on the couch at 5 a.m. with the number 3 on my hand where 4 had been the night before. I had crossed it out and rewritten it in the dark sometime around 2. 3 days left. I showered, dressed, and was pouring coffee when Boyd called. His voice had a particular edge to it. The edge that meant someone had beaten us to the next move. Cyrus walked into Phoenix PD 40 minutes ago, Boyd said. He filed a formal harassment complaint. Against you. I set the mug down on the counter. The coffee sloshed over the rim and pooled around my wrist. I didn't wipe it. Tell me exactly what it says. Boyd's contact at the front desk had given him the summary. Cyrus had arrived in a pressed suit, calm and articulate, and presented himself as a grieving husband enduring an unhinged father-in-law's escalating fixation. He alleged repeated uninvited visits to his home, contact with Lori's friends and colleagues, veiled threats, obsessive behavior inconsistent with a rational response to a voluntary departure. He told the desk officer he understood that I was in pain. He told them he had tried to be patient. He told them he was beginning to feel unsafe. Has he made any explicit threats? The officer had asked. Not in words, Cyrus replied, But when a man with his background starts following you, the implication is clear enough. A man with his background. He meant the insurance career. A lifetime of investigating people reframed as a skill set for stalking. He had taken the one thing that made me dangerous to him and weaponized it into the one thing that made me look dangerous to everyone else. In the insurance world, we called it paper armor, filing just enough documentation to make yourself look like the victim before anyone realizes you're the one holding the knife. I had seen it in dozens of fraud cases. A claimant files a police report about a break-in 2 weeks before the house burns down. A husband reports marital threats 3 months before his wife disappears. The paperwork doesn't prove anything. It doesn't need to. It just has to be there first. And now Cyrus's paper was in the system before mine. Boyd, this isn't panic. This is strategy. I know. He's not scared of me. He's building a counter-narrative. If I walk into that police station with the insurance evidence, the first thing they'll pull up is a harassment file with my name on it. Everything I say gets filtered through the lens of an obsessive father who can't accept that his daughter left. So what do we do? I looked at the case folder on my kitchen table. Thicker than it had been a week ago. Heavier, now that the 60-day clause had joined everything else inside it. 6 weeks of evidence assembled by a man who had spent his career learning exactly how to build a case file that could not be ignored. He didn't file that complaint because he believed I was dangerous. He filed it because he knew I was right, and in 3 days, right wouldn't matter anymore if the paperwork said otherwise. We go anyway, I said, but we bring everything, and we let the paper speak louder than his performance. Vernon, they're going to question you. The complaint triggers a mandatory follow-up. You walk in there voluntarily, and they'll sit you in a room and ask you about every visit, every phone call, every contact you've made with Cyrus since Lori disappeared. Good. Good. I've sat across from 1,000 people in interview rooms, Boyd. I know how those conversations work. They'll ask me what I've been doing, I'll tell them, and then I'll show them why. I picked up the folder and weighed it in my hands, 3 inches thick. Every page, dated, sourced, and annotated in the margins, the way I had annotated 10,000 claims files before this one. If Cyrus had given the police a story, I would give them a case. I looked at the number on my hand. 3. The ink was smudging at the edges from the coffee spill, bleeding into the lines of my palm. 3 days. Cyrus had placed a harassment complaint between me and every detective in that building. He needed the system to look at me before it looked at him. But I had spent my entire career inside that system. I knew its language. I knew its pressure points. And tomorrow morning, I was going to walk through its front door and make it listen. The interrogation room smelled like floor cleaner and stale vending machine coffee. And the detective across from me had already decided I was the problem before I sat down. I had walked into Phoenix PD at 8 a.m. with my leather briefcase in one hand and the number 2 written on the back of the other. 2 days left. The desk sergeant checked my name, paused, checked it again, and made a phone call. Within 10 minutes, I was in a windowless room with a metal table and a detective who looked at me the way you look at a man who has been warned about but not yet charged. Detective Hargrove, broad-shouldered, mid-40s, crew-cut, and the habit of clicking his pen between questions like a metronome counting down my credibility. He had the complaint file open in front of him. Cyrus's version of events, the concerned husband, the unstable father-in-law. Mr. Ashford, your son-in-law says you've shown up at his residence 3 times uninvited. Is that accurate? Twice, I said. The 3rd time he invited me in and offered me coffee. Click, click. The pen tapped against the folder. He also says you've been contacting your daughter's friends and colleagues, asking questions the police have already asked. The police stopped asking. I didn't. Hargrove studied me. I recognized the look. I had worn it myself 1,000 times, the expression of a professional who has heard the same kind of story from the same kind of person often enough to file it under predictable, grieving father, denial stage, can't accept the goodbye. I had sat on that side of the table 1,000 times in my career, the side where you already know the answer and you're just waiting for the other person to confirm it. Now I was on the opposite side, and the only weapon I had was patience. So I waited. Hargrove asked about the condo visit. I told him. He asked about Darcy. I told him. He asked about Boyd. I told him that too. Every answer calm, every sentence measured. No emotion leaking through the professional register I had spent 3 decades perfecting. I gave him nothing to escalate and nothing to dismiss. I gave him the voice of a claims examiner, delivering testimony flat, precise, and backed by documentation. After 22 minutes, Hargrove paused. He flipped to the last page of the complaint, read it, and reached for his coffee. That was the moment. Before you close that file, Detective, I'd like you to open another one. I reached into the briefcase and placed the folder on the table. 3 inches thick. Every page dated, sourced, and annotated. I slid it across the metal surface until it rested beside Cyrus's complaint like a counterweight on a scale. Hargrove looked at the folder, then at me. What is this? 32 years of professional experience applied to the disappearance of my daughter. Every document is sourced, every date is verified. You don't need to believe me. You just need to read. He opened it. The first page was the anomaly list. He scanned it and turned to the second, the wedding photographs, printed at full resolution with the mystery woman circled in each frame. Third page, the memorial photo from Cyrus's hallway, matched side by side with frame 247. Fourth, the burner phone log. 12 Thursday calls highlighted in yellow. Fifth, the missing person report from Minnesota, the presumptive death ruling, and the payout record. The detective's pen stopped moving the moment he saw the insurance figure on the first wife. $780,000 paid on a woman with no death certificate? He looked up at me, and the expression had changed. Not sympathy, not yet. But the automatic dismissal was gone. He turned to the next section. The policy on Lori, the coverage amount, the sole beneficiary, the 60-day accelerated clause, the activation date, the math. He didn't speak for nearly a full minute. He turned one page, then another, then a third. His expression changed 3 times, confusion, then recognition, then something I hadn't expected to see in a man who had walked into this room ready to write me off. Concern. Hargrove closed the folder. He set his pen down, no more clicking. He placed both hands flat on the table the way a man does when he's about to change the direction of a conversation that he thought was already finished. Then he said 5 words. I need to make a call. He stood, picked up the folder, and walked out of the interrogation room without looking back. The door closed behind him with a soft pneumatic hiss, and I sat alone in the room that smelled like floor cleaner, listening to his footsteps fade down the hallway. The number on the back of my hand was smudging. 2 days. But for the first time in weeks, I wasn't the only one counting. Boyd Mercer's number lit up my phone at 6:14 in the morning. Boyd never called before office hours, unless something broke open. Hargrove's call from the interrogation room had gone somewhere. I just didn't know where until now. Come to the station, Boyd said. His voice was tight. The professional voice, the one he used when evidence had arrived and theory was no longer required. Don't stop for coffee. Don't call anyone. Just come. I drove across Phoenix with my hands steady on the wheel. Years of fraud work had taught me that the moment real evidence surfaces, the liar's timeline starts compressing. Every hour Cyrus didn't know about whatever Boyd had found was an hour he couldn't destroy something else. My hands being steady should have been a comfort. It wasn't. The steadiness scared me more than shaking would have, because it meant the examiner in me had taken over completely, and the father was somewhere underneath. holding his breath. Boyd met me in the hallway outside the video review room, not his office, the hallway. That meant he wanted to brief me before I saw whatever was on the screen. Hargrove was already inside. I could see him through the glass partition, standing with his arms crossed, staring at a paused monitor. The call he had made from the interrogation room, it had gone to Boyd. The threads were connected. Hargrove nodded when I entered. No warmth, no hostility. Professional acknowledgement from a man who had walked into a room ready to dismiss me 2 days ago and walked out carrying my evidence folder. Something had changed behind his eyes. Boyd sat down at the console and pulled up a file, but before he hit play, he asked me a question. Did Cyrus ever mention owning a second vehicle? No. He drives a black Audi, just the one. He doesn't own a second car, Boyd said. The vehicle on this footage is registered to a rental company. He rented it the morning Lori disappeared and returned it the next day. Cleaned. The premeditation dropped like a stone through water. He hadn't used his own car. He had rented one the morning of and returned it scrubbed. That wasn't impulse. That was preparation. Boyd pressed play. Grainy footage. A marina security camera mounted on a pole at the Lake Pleasant access road. Timestamp 9:47 p.m., the night Lori vanished. A dark sedan pulled into the frame, parked away from the lit area near the water, and a figure stepped out. The camera was too far for facial detail, but I knew that gait, the deliberate stride, the way he held his shoulders like a man walking into a meeting he had already rehearsed. Cyrus. He was carrying something heavy in both hands. He moved toward the water and disappeared behind a boat storage shed. The camera angle lost him there. Boyd paused the footage, let the silence hold for 3 seconds, then jumped to the exit timestamp. 11:02 p.m., same sedan, same figure, returning to the car empty-handed. I did the math out loud. Lori's farewell text to her friend Faye Ballard was sent at 10:26 p.m. Cyrus arrived at the lake 40 minutes before that text was sent. Either Lori sent it from the lake or someone else sent it from her phone while standing beside the water where her husband had just carried something heavy into the lake. Dark. Hargrove spoke for the first time. He didn't address the footage. He addressed the evidence folder I had given him 2 days ago. Mr. Ashford, your daughter's policy has an accelerated payout clause for accidental death with no body recovery in water. He said it flatly. Reading from notes. Did you write policies like this in your career? I investigated them, I said. Exposed them. That's how I know what this is. Boyd laid out the next steps. Rental company records subpoenaed. Cyrus's phone GPS data requested for that night. A dive team dispatched to the area near the boat shed. I asked if they were going to bring Cyrus in. Boyd and Hargrove exchanged a look. The look that means not yet. Not until the case is airtight. I stood to leave. Hargrove stopped me at the door. One more thing. The rental was booked online. The account used wasn't in Cyrus's name. He paused. It was in Lori's. I stood there and let that settle into me like cold water filling a crack in concrete. He had rented the car under my daughter's identity. If it was ever traced, it would point to her, not him. He was building a narrative in which Lori drove herself to the lake. I walked out to the parking lot. March sunlight hit my face, sharp and clean. Cyrus hadn't just planned to make my daughter disappear. He had planned for her to take the blame for her own vanishing. And the clock on that policy was still ticking. The lawyer arrived before they even brought Cyrus in. I was still in the hallway outside the video review room, processing what the rental booking in Lori's name meant, when the front doors of Phoenix PD swung open and a silver-haired man in a tailored charcoal suit walked straight to the front desk and said a name I had been hoping to hear in handcuffs. I'm here for Cyrus Prescott. I'm his attorney. Malcolm Voss. Mid-60s, lean, with the posture of a man who had walked into police stations the way most people walk into restaurants, frequently, comfortably, and with a reservation. He set a leather briefcase on the counter and produced a business card without being asked. Boyd was standing beside me. We both heard it. We looked at each other, and in that look was a single shared understanding: nobody had contacted Cyrus yet. The footage review had happened at dawn. Hargrove had made his calls. Subpoenas were in motion. But no one, not Boyd, not Hargrove, not any officer on this floor had reached out to Cyrus Prescott. Someone in this building had talked. Somebody tipped him off, Boyd said, low enough that only I could hear. That footage was need to know. Voss spent 20 minutes establishing his presence like a man planting a flag. He informed the desk sergeant that his client would not be available for questioning without formal process. He used words like premature and unsubstantiated and rights of the accused. He never raised his voice. He didn't need to. 40 minutes later, Cyrus walked through the same doors, composed, showered, wearing a sport coat. He sat down across from Hargrove in the interview room, and I watched through the one-way glass from the observation booth, my knuckles white against the ledge. I uncurled my fingers one at a time. Claims examiners don't break windows. Cyrus answered every question about the rental car with the same polished precision I had heard on the phone the night Lori vanished. He claimed Lori had access to all his accounts. She borrowed his passwords regularly. The rental could have been her booking. He was home that night. His phone records would confirm it. Lori used my accounts all the time, he said, leaning back in his chair like a man discussing a minor billing error. She had every password I have. I was home that night. Check my phone records. We intend to, Mr. Prescott, Hargrove said. Voss leaned forward and placed his hand on the table. My client has cooperated fully. Unless you have evidence placing him at the scene beyond a rental agreement in someone else's name, I believe we're done. Then he produced a printout Cyrus's phone GPS data. Already pulled, already organized, already annotated by someone who had done this kind of work before. The phone placed Cyrus at his Tempe condo from 8 p.m. to 7 a.m. on the night in question. How do you watch your daughter's killer sit in a police chair and present an alibi he built by leaving his phone at home while he drove a rented car to a lake in the dark? Hargrove looked at the GPS data. He looked at Voss. He had nothing to counter at the carrier subpoena for the cellular tower records that would show whether the phone moved independently of Cyrus's actual location was still 2 weeks out. The phone was home, Boyd said to me afterward, standing in the corridor while Cyrus and Voss gathered their things. That doesn't mean he was. We just can't prove it yet. So many years on the job. I'd watched 100 men walk out of rooms they should never have left. Adjusters who lied, claimants who stole, beneficiaries who smiled through depositions while their signatures were still wet on forged documents. But none of them had my daughter. Cyrus walked past me in the corridor. He paused, turned, and said, quietly, with the warmth of a man who had practiced this line in a mirror, "I'm sorry about Lori, Vernon. I hope they find her." I said nothing. I watched his face. The smile was there, the same one from the wedding, the same one from the condo, but this time the corners were trembling. Not much. A millimeter of movement, the kind of tremor you'd miss if you hadn't spent 3 decades reading faces for a living. I memorized that tremor the way I used to memorize claim numbers. Filed it, kept it. Cyrus walked out the front doors with Voss beside him. As Voss held the door, I caught something I almost missed, a luggage tag on the handle of his briefcase. Not a Phoenix address, a Scottsdale hotel. He wasn't local. Cyrus hadn't just called a lawyer, he had imported one. And that meant someone with resources far beyond a private equity fund manager's salary was making sure my son-in-law walked free. I had dialed that burner number 11 times over 3 weeks. It never rang. It never went to voicemail. It just absorbed the signal and gave nothing back. Like dropping stones into a well with no bottom. So when it rang me back at 8:47 that evening, the same number, the same prefix, glowing on my kitchen table beside the case folder and the cold remains of a dinner I hadn't touched. I didn't recognize the sound of my own phone. I stared at the screen for 3 rings. The claims examiner in me said, "Record the call." The father said, "Answer it." I answered. "Who is this?" A woman's voice, low, careful. The voice of someone who had rehearsed this call the way Cyrus rehearsed his, except hers carried the particular weight of someone who had been afraid for a very long time. "Are you Vernon Ashford Laurie's father?" "Yes." "Who is this?" "My name is Rena Whitfield." The kitchen went very still. I knew that name. I had found it in Boyd's research 3 weeks ago, listed in county records as the maiden name of Cyrus Prescott's first wife. The one who drowned in a lake in Minnesota. The one with a memorial frame on his hallway shelf. The one who had been declared dead 7 years ago after a boating accident that never produced a body. Rena Whitfield. 34 years old, if she was alive. And she was on my phone. 7 years. She had been breathing for 7 years while her obituary collected dust in a county archive, and her ex-husband displayed her photograph beside dried flowers like a trophy. "He told everyone I drowned," she said. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice of a woman who had practiced being invisible. I let them believe it because that was the only way to stay alive. "You've been alive for 7 years," I said, "and you never went to the police?" "I went to the police in 2016. Walked into a station in Flagstaff and told them everything. They said there was no crime. The death certificate had been vacated. The insurance claim was denied on review. Case closed." She paused. "When you've been declared dead and nobody cares that you're not, you learn to stay quiet." I sat down at the kitchen table and pressed the phone hard against my ear. The smell of cold coffee drifted up from the mug beside my case folder. My hands were not shaking. They should have been. "You were at the wedding," I said, "in the photographs, behind Laurie." Silence. Then, "I needed someone to see me. I couldn't talk to her directly. Cyrus would have known." So I stood where the camera could find me and hoped that someone, eventually, would look. I looked. "I know, that's why I'm calling." Rena told me the rest in short, careful sentences. Each one laid down like a brick in a wall she had been building alone for 7 years. She had found Laurie through social media after seeing the wedding announcement. She recognized the pattern immediately: the quick marriage, the young wife, the polished husband. She bought the burner phone in Flagstaff and called Laurie every Thursday for 12 weeks trying to warn her. Laurie never picked up, never called back. I had spent a career reading fraud like sheet music. Listening to Rena, I heard the same song in a different key. Cyrus had simply transposed it for a larger payout. "The policy on me was $780,000, Rena said. Same clause, accidental death, water, no body recovery. He's refined the formula since then." "How did you survive?" "He broke my jaw and put me in the water. I'm a stronger swimmer than he expected. I made it to a dock half a mile down the shore and never went back." I closed my eyes. The kitchen light buzzed overhead. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's sprinkler clicked through its cycle. "Where are you now?" I asked. "Close enough to meet tomorrow, but not close enough for Cyrus to know I exist. I need you to come forward, formally, with everything you have." "I know. That's why I called you and not the police. The police have already decided I don't exist." She paused again, and when she spoke next, her voice dropped to almost nothing. "If you don't act now, your daughter will disappear the way I did. Except Cyrus learned from his mistakes with me. He won't leave a survivor this time." The line went silent. I pulled the phone away from my ear and looked at the screen. She had sent a text, a location, and a time. A diner in Surprise, Arizona, tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. I set the phone on the table beside the case folder and sat in the quiet kitchen for a long time, staring at the address of a meeting with a woman who had come back from the dead to save a daughter she had never met. She was already in the booth when I walked in, smaller than her voice, younger than her fear, and wearing 7 years of hiding in the hollows under her eyes. I had arrived at the diner in surprise 20 minutes early and picked a seat facing the door, the way I used to during field audits when I didn't know who I was meeting. But Rena Whitfield had beaten me there. She sat in the back corner with a manila folder in front of her and the glass of water she hadn't touched. Mid-30s, but the years had carved deeper than they should have. She looked like a woman who had spent a long time making herself smaller than she actually was. She slid the folder across the table before I could introduce myself. Inside were photocopies, her own vacated death certificate, the denied insurance claim, and a photograph her face, swollen and purple along the left side, jaw wired shut, taken in what looked like a motel bathroom mirror. "He broke my jaw in 2 places before he put me in the water," she said. No preamble, no small talk. The plan was for me to drown. I just happened to be a stronger swimmer than he expected. I studied the photograph. The bruising was precise, concentrated on one side, the way it looks when someone is struck by a right-handed person standing directly in front of them. Not a fall. Not an accident. A hit. "Why didn't you testify?" I asked. "Against what charge? The police said there was no crime. A woman who isn't dead can't be murdered." She told me the pattern. Cyrus targeted women with thin family networks, women whose absence wouldn't trigger an army of relatives demanding answers. He married quickly, moved quickly, filed policies quickly. With Rena, the claim was denied on review after the body was never recovered. He lost the payout. But he didn't lose the method. Then she said the thing that detonated something inside my chest. He chose Lori because she had something I didn't, a father and insurance. He thought that made the policy look more legitimate. My career, all those years of exposing fraud. It hadn't protected my daughter. It had painted the target on her back. Cyrus hadn't married Lori. Despite my background, he had married her because of it. My name on her family tree was part of his cover story, a line item in his application that made the underwriter feel comfortable approving a policy 3 times larger than the one he had tried before. Before I tell you what Rena said next, the detail that changes this from a missing person case into something far worse, I need to ask, are you still with me? If so, comment whether you think Lori is still alive or not, and tell me why in 1 sentence. I want to know how you're reading this. A reminder, some details throughout this story have been shaped for emotional impact. What matters is the truth underneath. Rena leaned forward. Her voice dropped. "He needs her alive," she said. "He kept me in a rental cabin for 9 days while I signed everything he put in front of me. Power of attorney, joint accounts, beneficiary confirmations. Then he drove me to the lake. 9 days. She had been kept in a cabin for 9 days signing documents while her obituary ran in a local paper." "You're saying Lori is alive right now?" "I'm saying he can't collect without her signatures. The accelerated clause requires either confirmed death or completed asset transfer. He hasn't filed the claim yet, which means the paperwork isn't done, which means she's still breathing." I pulled out my phone and called Boyd, put him on speaker. Rena didn't flinch. Boyd listened to everything without interrupting. When Rena finished, he asked the only question that mattered. "Rena, would you make a formal statement on record?" "I'll do more than that," she said. "I'll testify." I started the car in the diner parking lot, with Boyd still on the line. Neither of us spoke for the first 2 miles. Then Boyd said one more thing. "The dive team found something near the boat shed at the lake. Not a body." He paused. "A weighted duffel bag, women's clothing inside, a purse, and Lori's wedding ring." I pulled to the shoulder of the road and sat with both hands on the wheel. He had staged the drowning evidence, planted her belongings near the water to support the narrative. But there was no body in that lake because there was never meant to be one, not yet. Lori was somewhere else, alive, signing papers, running out of time. And so was I. Rena had survived Cyrus once by disappearing. Now I was asking her to do the one thing that terrified her more than drowning, be visible again. We were still in the diner booth, Boyd still on speakerphone, the duffel bag revelation hanging over us like smoke. Rena stared at her hands on the table, the hands that had pulled her through dark water 7 years ago. I needed those hands to sign a witness statement. "You survived him," I said. "My daughter might not get that chance unless you speak."
"He told me no one would believe a dead woman."
Her voice was quiet, steady, the kind of steady that costs everything to maintain. 7 years I believed him. Boyd's voice came through the speaker, calm and precise. "Ms. Whitfield, a formal statement from you changes this from circumstantial to pattern evidence. That's what gets warrants signed. The DA's office can offer you immunity. You were a coerced victim, not an accomplice." Rena looked at me, not at the phone, at me. She was searching for something in my face, the same thing I had searched for in the evidence folder, in the wedding photographs, in the numbers on the policy. She was looking for proof that this time would be different. "This time I won't stay silent," she said. She walked out of the diner into the morning sunlight, and I watched her blink against it like someone relearning the world. 7 years in the shadows. 7 years of being a ghost with a heartbeat. And now she was stepping back into her own name because a stranger's daughter needed her to be brave one more time. I drove home. There was more work to do. Faye Ballard was sitting on my front porch when I pulled into the driveway. 28 years old, sharp-eyed. The kind of woman who remembered every detail of every conversation because she treated words the way Lori treated color, as things with weight and meaning. She had been Lori's closest friend since college, and she was holding a folder thick with printed text messages. "I brought everything," she said before I reached the door. "Every text Lori sent me for the past 3 years, and I brought the last one." We sat at my kitchen table. Faye spread the printouts across the surface, pages and pages of message threads, highlighted in 3 colors. Yellow for Lori's habitual patterns, green for variations, and pink for the farewell text, isolated on its own page. Circled in red marker, "Lori never uses periods after short sentences," Faye said, pointing to a column of highlighted examples. "She double spaces before her emojis. She starts most texts lowercase. She sends 3 or 4 messages in a row instead of one long one." She tapped the circled text. "This message has perfect grammar. Full stops, no emoji. One single sentence. That's not her." "Could she have written it under stress?" I asked. I had to ask. The examiner in me required every alternative to be eliminated. Under stress, she writes more like herself, not less. I have 3 years of panic texts from her bad days, arguments, the time she thought her landlord was going to evict her. Every single one is messy, fast, full of typos. Faye's voice hardened. "This text is clean, too clean. Someone who doesn't know how Lori texts wrote this." She never used periods after short sentences. 3 words of analysis, and the entire goodbye unraveled. I pulled out my phone and opened the case folder. The lake footage timestamp, the rental car arriving at 9:47 p.m., and the farewell text sent at 10:26 p.m. 39 minutes later. Sent from the same area where the security camera had captured a figure carrying something heavy toward the water. "The text was sent from the lake," I said, "at the exact time he was there." Faye's face crumbled. Not the dramatic kind, the quiet kind. The kind that happens when something you suspected becomes something you know. "He wrote her goodbye for her," she whispered. "He didn't even let her say it herself." I photographed every printout, every highlighted pattern, every circled anomaly. Then I called Boyd. He answered with news of his own. The carrier GPS data had finally come through. Cyrus's personal phone had been at his Tempe condo that night, just as his lawyer had claimed. But the subpoena pulled something else, a second device on the same account. A tablet, registered 3 weeks before Lori disappeared, that it pinged a cell tower near Lake Pleasant at 9:51 p.m. and then tracked north. North to a location Boyd hadn't identified yet. Somewhere past Carefree, off the grid. He left the phone at home as an alibi, Boyd said, but he forgot about the tablet. The tablet was still pinging. Wherever it was still there. And if the tablet was there, Lori might be too. Boyd didn't wait for me to sit down. He turned his monitor around and pointed at a parcel of land 3 miles from the boat shed where the duffel bag had been found. The tablet's GPS ping north of Carefree had led to a dead end. The signal bounced off a tower in an area with no registered address. But Boyd hadn't stopped there. He had spent the night cross-referencing Cyrus's financial records against property databases in 3 counties, and at 4 a.m. he found it. Prescott Canyon LLC, a shell company filed in Nevada 6 months before Lori disappeared. Registered agent, a mailbox service in Henderson. Property tax bills routed to a P.O. box in Tempe, Cyrus's zip code. The LLC owned a single asset, a 2-bedroom cabin on a private road near Lake Pleasant, purchased with cash. He set this up 6 months before the wedding, I said. Boyd nodded. He bought the cage before he caught the bird. 6 months, half a year before Lori walked down the aisle. Cyrus had already purchased the place where he would hold her. The shell company wasn't a reaction to an opportunity. It was architecture. He had drawn the blueprint while he was still courting my daughter, still shaking my hand at family dinners, still practicing the smile that made everyone in the room believe he was the most trustworthy man in it. I sat down in Boyd's cracked leather chair and stared at the property record on the screen. Boyd pulled a calendar up beside it and started counting. 48 hours. I had spent a career measuring fraud in dollars. Now I was measuring my daughter's life in hours. Day 58, Boyd said. The accelerated clause window closes in 2 days. If he files the claim and the signatures are done, the payout processes automatically. After that, he doesn't need her alive. After that, keeping her alive is the only thing that can convict him. We sat with that for a moment. The office smelled like old coffee and printer toner. The barber shop below was playing the radio something with horns, something that sounded like a Sunday morning in a world where no one's daughter was locked in a cabin near a lake. Boyd laid every piece of evidence on his desk in sequence. The rental car records, the lake footage timestamps, the staged belongings, the forged text analysis. Rena's statement, the shell company filing, the cabin deed. 7 items, 7 points on a line that ran straight from a February wedding to an April deadline. Local PD can't touch the cabin alone, Boyd said. The shell company is registered in Nevada. That makes the fraud interstate. Wire fraud, money laundering, kidnapping and furtherance of insurance fraud, all federal. So we need the FBI. We need the FBI. And the good news is that the interstate element is exactly what gives them jurisdiction. Phoenix PD would need weeks. The Bureau can move in days. How do you sit in a plastic chair in a cramped office above a barber shop and wait for a phone call that will determine whether your daughter lives through the weekend? You sit still, you breathe. You let the man beside you, the man who spent 26 years reading the same files you read, do what he does best. Boyd picked up the phone and dialed the FBI field office in Phoenix. I could only hear his side. He laid out the case in the same flat, professional cadence we had both learned over decades of presenting evidence to people who needed convincing. Pattern fraud, 2 victims spanning 7 years, kidnapping in furtherance of a federal insurance scheme, shell company crossing state lines, a cabin with a location. A deadline in 48 hours. Then Boyd went quiet, listening. His pen stopped moving. His jaw tightened. He wrote something on his legal pad, underlined it, and hung up. He turned to me with an expression I had never seen on his face in 26 years of friendship. Relief fighting with fear. Hope contaminated by something worse. "They're in," he said. "Tactical team deploys tomorrow at dawn.
I exhaled for what felt like the first time in an hour.
But Vernon, he paused. He looked down at the note he had underlined. They found something else while running the case through their system. Cyrus filed the insurance claim this morning. 6 a.m. digital submission. He's not waiting for the window to close. He's cashing out early. The room contracted. The radio downstairs kept playing. Boyd's pen lay still on the legal pad. Cyrus had moved first. He had filed before the deadline, which meant one of two things. Either the signatures were already complete, or he had decided he didn't need them anymore. Either way, my daughter was running out of reasons to be kept alive. The raid was tomorrow at dawn. That was either soon enough or it wasn't, and there was nothing I could do now but wait for morning. The fog came off the lake like something alive, and I counted my heartbeats the way I used to count discrepancies in claim files, one at a time, waiting for the number that didn't belong. I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark in my living room until Boyd's headlights swept across the front window at 2:30 a.m. And then I walked out the door, carrying nothing but my phone and the knowledge that my daughter was either behind a door at the end of a dirt road or wasn't anywhere at all. Now I was in the back seat of Boyd's car. Third vehicle in a convoy of 4, 3 FBI SUVs and Boyd's unmarked sedan, crawling along a single-lane dirt road north of Lake Pleasant with the headlights off. GPS guided the lead vehicle. The desert pressed against the windows, dark and formless. Somewhere ahead. Through the fog that rose from the water like breath was the cabin that a shell company had purchased 6 months before my daughter's wedding. Agent Caldwell's voice came over the radio. Big tactical team leader, calm, methodical, the kind of voice that sounds the same whether ordering coffee or breaching a building. He had briefed us at the staging point 20 minutes ago. No sirens, no announcements. Confirm occupancy before breach. All units hold at the tree line, he said. No light, no sound. We confirm occupancy before we move. Boyd glanced at me in the rearview mirror. You stay behind the perimeter line, no matter what you hear. I've waited 58 days, I said. I can wait 5 more minutes. The convoy stopped. I realized I hadn't breathed since the vehicle slowed. I forced air into my lungs like a man remembering how. Through the windshield, through the fog, I saw it, small, single-story, weathered wood that had gone gray in the desert sun. One window on the left side glowed with a dim yellow light. The kind of glow that comes from a single bulb powered by a generator, not a grid. I could hear the generator now, a low hum behind the structure, steady as a pulse. No vehicles visible, but tire tracks in the mud were fresh deep enough to have been made in the last 48 hours. Rena's voice came through the radio from the lead vehicle. She had insisted on coming. She needed to see the layout, she said. She needed to confirm what she already knew. One door in front, she said, her voice barely steady. One window on each side. The back wall is solid, no exit. He picks places with no way out. He builds cages. That's what Cyrus does. He builds cages and calls them marriages. He finds women and puts them in rooms with one door and no windows on the back wall, and he keeps them there until the paperwork is done. Rena had survived one of these cages. My daughter was inside the other. Caldwell's team moved, dark shapes in tactical gear, spreading from the tree line in a crescent formation, advancing on the cabin in silence. I watched from Boyd's car, my hands flat on my knees, my heart rate somewhere north of 120. Boyd sat beside me with one hand on my arm, not restraining steadying. The way you hold someone who might bolt. 50 yards from the door. 40. 30. The light didn't fade. It was killed. Snapped off like a switch thrown by a hand that knew exactly what was coming. 1 second the window glowed yellow, the next darkness. Complete. The generator kept humming. Whoever was inside hadn't lost power. They had made a choice. Caldwell's fist went up. The crescent froze. Light just went out, he whispered into the radio. Possible alert. Hold positions. Thermal. Give me a read. Silence. The fog curled around the agent's boots. The generator hummed. Boyd's grip tightened on my arm. "Don't move," he said. I didn't. I sat in the back seat of a car on a dirt road at 4 in the morning and watched my daughter's cage go dark and did not move. Because moving would not help. Because moving would get someone killed. Because the claims examiner and me understood that the next 30 seconds belonged to the people with the training and the guns. Not to a 62-year-old man with a case folder and a broken heart. The thermal operator's voice crackled through the radio. 2 heat signatures, 1 stationary rear of the structure, low position, 1 moving heading toward the back wall. The stationary signature, low position. That could be someone sitting, someone restrained, someone waiting. The moving signature was heading toward the wall Rena said had no exit. Heading toward a dead end or heading toward something none of us could see on a thermal screen. Caldwell's voice cut through the fog. "Breach, now." The door came apart on the second ram hit, and the first thing I heard wasn't screaming, it was the sound of paper being torn. Flashlights cut through the darkness. Agents poured into the cabin, shouting commands, voices layered on top of each other, boots on wooden floor, the sharp crack of a door being kicked inward somewhere down a hallway. I was out of Boyd's car before he could grab me. I crossed the perimeter line at a run, and Boyd's voice behind me, "Vernon, stay back," was already something I had chosen not to hear. The main room was small. A table, 2 chairs, a propane lantern on the counter, still warm. And in the hallway beyond, pinned face down on the floor by 2 agents, was Cyrus Prescott. His hands were cuffed behind his back, and shredded paper was scattered around him like confetti pages torn in half. Fragments of documents he had been destroying in the seconds between the light going dark and the door coming down. He wasn't running. He wasn't threatening anyone. He was shredding evidence. Even at the end, his first instinct was to protect the paperwork. "Subject down," Caldwell called from the hallway. "Second room, check the second room." An agent kicked the back room door. It swung inward and the flashlight swept across a space no larger than a walk-in closet, a folding table, a camp cot, a plastic chair. And on the floor against the far wall, knees drawn to her chest, wrists bruised and wrapped in gauze she must have torn from a bedsheet, my daughter, Lori. 29 years old, 20 pounds lighter than the last time I had held her. I felt every missing pound like a year I had failed to protect her. She looked up at me. Her eyes were hollow and wet and enormous in the flashlight beam. Her lips moved before the sound came. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I kept not signing." I dropped to my knees on the plywood floor and put my arms around her. She smelled like dust and sweat and the particular staleness of a room with no ventilation. Her shoulders were sharp under my hands. Her fingers gripped the back of my jacket with a strength that didn't match her frame, the grip of someone who had been holding on to something invisible for weeks. "You don't have to sign anything ever again," I said. She pressed her face into my shoulder and cried without sound. On the folding table behind her, spread in neat rows, were the documents, power of attorney filings, joint account transfers, beneficiary confirmations, unsigned, every single one. She had refused. For weeks, locked in a room with 1 door and no windows on the back wall, she had refused to put her name on the papers that would have signed away her own life. I held her until Caldwell's team brought a shock blanket and a paramedic. Then I stood up, walked back down the hallway, and entered the main room where Cyrus was being hauled to his feet. He started talking before I reached him. The voice was the same, polished, measured, calibrated. The voice from the wedding. The voice from the night she disappeared. The voice that had practiced every line before it ever reached a listener's ear. "You don't understand," he said. "There were threats. I was keeping her safe. This was a safe house. I can explain everything." You spend 32 years learning to read liars. Then your son-in-law opens his mouth and you realize you've been reading for this moment your entire career. I crouched beside him, eye level. close enough to see the veins in his neck pulsing, close enough to smell the sweat that his voice was trying to hide. "Then explain the life insurance policy," I said. My voice was level, the claims examiner's voice, the one that stayed flat while the world broke apart around it. The one with the accelerated payout clause, the one you filed a claim on 2 days ago. Cyrus's mouth stopped moving. His jaw worked once, twice, the mechanical motion of a man searching for a script that no longer exists. Nothing came out. For the first time since I had known him, the most polished man in the room had nothing to say. Agents hauled him toward the door. I watched him go. Then I looked down at the hallway floor where the shredded documents lay scattered. Most were destroyed beyond reading, but one torn page had landed face up, caught against the baseboard. I crouched and read it in the beam of a flashlight. A woman's name I had never seen before, a city I didn't recognize, and a policy date 6 months from now. Lori wasn't his last. She was just his latest. Cyrus hadn't been building a crime. He had been building a business. Rena Whitfield walked through the cabin door like she was returning from an errand, not rising from the dead. Cyrus saw her before anyone spoke. His body did what his mouth couldn't. He staggered backward into the kitchen counter, knocking a ceramic mug to the floor where it shattered against the baseboard. The sound was the only thing in the room for 3 full seconds. "Hello, Cyrus," she said. His face cycled through expressions I'd only ever seen: isolated shock, fury, confusion, terror, but never stacked on top of each other like cards in a bad hand. He gripped the counter behind him as if the floor had tilted. "You're dead," he said. Not a question, a correction, like he was editing a document she'd submitted with errors. "I was supposed to be." She stopped 6 feet from him, close enough to be heard without raising her voice, far enough that Agent Caldwell's team wouldn't need to intervene. "You made sure of that. The boating accident on that lake in Minnesota. The life jacket with the cut strap. The policy you cashed 11 weeks later." I kept my arm around Lori. She was sitting on the edge of the cot now, a shock blanket over her shoulders, watching the woman she'd never known existed dismantle the man she'd married. Her fingers were ice against my wrist. Cyrus found his composure the way a drowning man finds a log, desperately and without grace. "I don't know who this woman is," he said, turning to Malcolm Voss, who stood near the hallway with his briefcase clutched against his chest like a shield. "She's clearly been coached. This is entrapment." Voss said nothing. That silence told me everything his billable hours never would. Rena pulled a folded envelope from her jacket. "The marina receipt for the boat rental. Your signature. Not the alias, your actual signature. You got lazy by the second page." She set it on the table between them. "The offshore account in Grand Cayman where the $780,000 landed. Routing number, transaction date, your mother's maiden name as the security question." A second document joined the first, and the medical records from the hospital in Minneapolis, where they pumped lake water out of my lungs for 6 hours while you were already filing the initial claim. Here is the thing about watching a con artist lose his audience. It happens in the eyes first. Cyrus's gaze, which had always moved with calculated precision, selecting which person to focus on, which angle to present, began darting, corner to corner, door to window, searching for geometry that no longer existed. "None of this is admissible," he said. But the sentence came out fractured, like he'd rehearsed it for a different courtroom. "It doesn't need to be," Rena said. "I do." Agent Caldwell stepped forward from the hallway. In his hand was not a weapon, but something worse for Cyrus. A small black device the size of a deck of cards, with a single green LED blinking on its face. "Mr. Prescott," Caldwell said, "this cabin has been under electronic surveillance since 1400 hours yesterday, audio and video. 4 devices, kitchen, main room, bedroom, and the porch where you made 2 phone calls this evening." The room contracted around that sentence. I felt Lori's grip tighten on my arm. Cyrus's mouth opened and closed twice without producing sound. "The call at 1912," Caldwell continued, consulting a small notebook, "in which you instructed an unidentified party to, quote, move the timeline on the Ashford file before her father gets a judge involved. And the call at 2041, in which you confirmed the location of documents relating to a third insurance policy." Third policy. The torn document I'd found in the bedroom, the one with a name I didn't recognize and a policy date 6 months from now, wasn't an artifact. It was a blueprint. Cyrus hadn't stopped with Rena. He hadn't stopped with Lori. There was someone else already in the architecture of his next disappearance. "Who is Marin Solano?" I asked. The name landed like a brick through glass. Cyrus's composure didn't crack, it evaporated. For one unguarded moment, I saw the actual man behind every rehearsed smile and calculated pause. He was terrified. Not of prison, not of exposure, of the fact that a 62-year-old retired claims examiner had found the one thread he thought was still buried. Voss set his briefcase on the floor. "I need to speak with my client," he said. But his voice carried the unmistakable tone of a man about to stop being someone's lawyer. Caldwell clicked off the recorder. "You'll have that opportunity at the Federal Building. Transport arrives in 12 minutes. Outside." The first light was turning the desert sky from black to bruised purple. Lori pressed her face into my shoulder. Rena stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the man who had tried to kill her realize that the room had no exits left. Not the doors, not the windows, not the law. The federal handcuffs made a sound I'd heard 1,000 times in depositions, in courtroom hallways, on recordings played back at half speed during fraud reviews. A precise, mechanical click. But never once in 3 decades of claims work had that sound meant my daughter was safe. Caldwell's team walked Cyrus out of the cabin into the pre-dawn dark. 2 agents flanked him, one hand on each elbow, guiding him across the gravel like cargo. He didn't speak, didn't resist, didn't turn around to look at Lori or Rena or me. The man who had always had an explanation, polished, rehearsed, delivered with the timing of someone who'd practiced in mirrors, had nothing. His silence filled the clearing louder than any lie he'd ever told. They folded him into the back seat of a black SUV, the door shut. No one waved, no one followed. Caldwell stopped beside me on his way to the second vehicle. "He'll be processed at the Federal Building downtown. No bail hearing for 48 hours. He's done." I nodded. I wanted to say something, "Thank you," or "It's over," or some version of the words that were supposed to exist for a moment like this. But I just watched the taillights shrink down the dirt road until the dust settled and the desert was quiet again. And all I could smell was creosote and the faint antiseptic scent drifting from the cabin's open door. I went back inside. The paramedics had moved Lori to the back room. An IV line ran from her left arm to a bag hanging on a coat hook someone had repurposed as a stand. A shock blanket was pulled tight around her shoulders. Boyd stood in the hallway, arms folded, watching me approach. He gave a single nod, the kind that carried everything and demanded nothing, then stepped outside to give us the room. She was 29 years old, and she reached for my hand the way she had when she was 5. Same grip, same fingers, same trust that I would not let go. I took her hand and sat on the floor beside the cot, my back against the wall, and for a while neither of us spoke. The cabin ticked and settled around us. Somewhere outside, a vehicle engine started and faded. "I heard your voice through the wall," she said. Her voice was thin, scraped raw, but steady. "When you said the number, the policy amount, I knew it was over. I knew you'd found everything." "You didn't sign the documents," I said. She shook her head. "He had them ready. Transfer of beneficiary, accelerated payout authorization, a medical power of attorney that would have given him control of everything." He sat across from me at that table and told me it was standard estate planning. She paused. But the language was wrong. The contingency clauses were stacked in his favor. Every page was designed to make me disappear on paper before I disappeared for real. How did you know? Her fingers tightened on mine. You taught me. When I was 16 and you brought home that stack of claims from work and spread them across the kitchen table. You said, when something doesn't feel right, don't sign. Walk away and call someone who isn't in the room. I remembered, Dad, every word. I pressed my forehead against her knuckles and closed my eyes. Decades of reading fine print and flagging discrepancies. And the thing that mattered most was a kitchen table lesson I barely remembered giving. She asked to go outside. I helped her stand, one arm around her waist, the IV disconnected by a paramedic who told us 5 minutes. We walked to the cabin's front step and sat down together. The lake stretched out below us, catching the first pink light of dawn. The same water Cyrus had used to stage her disappearance was turning gold at the edges. And the sky above the far ridge looked like watercolor bleeding upward from the horizon. It looks like that painting Mom had in the hallway, Lori said. Remember? I remember. Her voice was right there, tired and thin and real. Not reconstructed from voicemails. Not imagined during the hours I'd spent sitting in her empty apartment staring at her drawings on the wall. She was beside me, breathing, watching the sky change color. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't have to pretend she might still be alive. She was. Boyd's boots crunched on the gravel behind us. He crouched down and held out a single sheet of paper, not shredded, not burned, intact. A document recovered from the cabin's kitchen drawer. 4 lines, 4 women's names, policy amounts, and target dates beside each one. Rena, Lori, and Marin Solano accounted for the first 3. The 4th line was partially filled, in no last name yet, just a first name and a city. The city was Scottsdale. The first name was Darcy. Darcy's name on that list changed everything. I called her from the cabin's front step while Lori slept against my shoulder. Warned her to stay with someone she trusted, and promised Boyd would follow up within the hour. Boyd called back an hour later to confirm the other name on that list, Marin Solano, had already been reached by the Nevada field office. She never knew how close she'd come. Then I brought my daughter home. Lori had been back for 10 days before she could sit in a room without checking the locks twice. Another 3 before she could talk about what happened behind them. It was a Thursday afternoon when she finally started. We were on the couch in my living room in Arcadia, 2 mugs of chamomile going cold on the coffee table between us. She sat cross-legged with a blanket pulled around her shoulders, even though the house was warm. And she spoke the way witnesses speak when they've rehearsed the truth so many times it starts to sound like someone else's story. He said it was a surprise, she began. A friend's property out past the lake, a weekend away, just us. I believed him because that's what you do when you trust someone. She described the drive February evening, windows down, Cyrus playing music she liked. Normal. Practiced. He'd planned the route so the turnoff to the cabin came after dark, when the landscape was just headlights on gravel and nothing else. He took my phone at the turnoff. I asked why, and he said reception was bad out there. She paused. The blanket shifted on her shoulders. I knew then. Something in the way he reached for it, not asking, just taking. I knew something was wrong. I just didn't want to know what. The cabin had no internet, no landline, no neighbors within 3 miles. She'd checked. The windows in the back room had been screwed shut from the outside. The screws countersunk and painted over so they looked original. Cyrus had prepared the room weeks before he brought her there. He came every 2 or 3 days with documents. Power of attorney, joint account transfers, beneficiary amendments. The first time, she refused. She pushed the papers back across the table and told him she wanted to go home. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't touch her. He reached into his jacket and set a photograph on the table. It was my house. Taken from across the street that morning, the front porch, the mailbox, my car in the driveway. The timestamp was visible in the corner. Every morning, he photographed my house every single morning. While I was inside calling hospitals and filing reports and staring at her drawings on the wall, Cyrus was parked across the street, watching me search for the daughter he'd already locked away. He explained it like a business transaction, Lori said. Her voice was flat now, stripped of everything except the facts. Sign here, initial here, your father stays safe. He never threatened you directly. He just showed me a new photo every visit, different angles, the kitchen window, the back gate. He wanted me to know he could reach you whenever he wanted. I set my mug down because my hands were shaking and I didn't want her to see. The tea had gone cold anyway. The smell of chamomile, which had always meant comfort in this house, meant something different now. I signed them, she said. All of them, every page. You kept yourself alive, I told her. That's all that matters. Everything you signed, we can undo. How do you forgive yourself for teaching your daughter that trust is a virtue, when trust is the exact thing that locked her in that room I'd spent her whole life telling her to believe in people, to look for the good, to give second chances? Cyrus had weaponized every lesson. She told me about the text, the farewell message Faye had flagged weeks ago. Cyrus wrote it on Lori's phone while sitting across the table from her in the cabin. He composed it carefully. Full sentences, proper punctuation. The kind of grammar Lori never used. He asked if it sounded like something I'd say. I told him no. He sent it anyway. She almost smiled. He was so careful about everything else. But he didn't know how I text. He thought periods made it sound more real. His precision, the same obsessive control that let him run policies and forge documents and stage disappearances, was exactly what gave him away. Faye caught it. I caught it. The machine he'd built so carefully had a flaw he never considered. He didn't actually know his wife. Lori went quiet. She pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the cold tea. There's one more thing, she said. I haven't told Boyd. I haven't told the FBI. She looked at me. The last night before you came, Cyrus brought someone to the cabin. A woman. I'd never seen her before. They argued in the main room about the timeline and the next one. She swallowed. The woman called him a different name. Not Cyrus. Something else entirely. I called Boyd that night with the name Lori couldn't give me, the one Cyrus answered to. Boyd ran it against 3 databases and came back empty. An alias with no anchor, one of a dozen identities Voss's network had likely built for him over the years. A ghost with paperwork instead of a face. But the mystery woman was real. And somewhere in the FBI's cabin surveillance footage, her face was waiting to be matched. That search would take weeks. The federal case wouldn't. Rena Whitfield hadn't written her real name on anything in 7 years. The pen shook in her hand like it remembered what that name had cost her. I watched from a chair by the door of the federal prosecutor's conference room as she sat across from AUSA Grace Dunlap. A methodical woman in her mid-40s who ran the fraud division with the quiet intensity of someone who treated each charge like a brick in a wall she'd been building for weeks. Dunlap slid the witness statement across the table and uncapped a pen. Ms. Whitfield, for the record, you're signing as a cooperating witness under coerced victim clemency. Full cooperation, no charges for the circumstances of your disappearance. You understand the terms no. Rena didn't hesitate. I've been hiding for 7 years. I understand what it means to stop. She wrote her name, her real name, the one that had been printed on a presumptive death ruling in a Hennepin County courthouse, in a steady hand that contradicted the tremor I'd seen a moment before. She wrote it like someone stepping back into their own body. The document that had made her disappear was now undone by the document that made her the prosecution's most powerful weapon. Dunlap collected the pages and nodded. We'll need your full account, from the beginning. Rena told it from the beginning. 32 years I'd read fraud depositions. Hundreds of them staged accidents, inflated claims, forged medical records, beneficiary schemes that collapsed under the weight of their own paperwork. This was the first one where the victim's testimony read like a resurrection. She walked the prosecution team through everything: the 2015 boating accident on the lake in Minnesota, the broken jaw she'd suffered when she fought back on the boat, the months of recovery in a Minneapolis hospital under a borrowed name, the years afterward, different cities, cash jobs, rented rooms, always checking over her shoulder for a man who believed she was at the bottom of that lake. She gave them dates, account numbers, the name of the Nevada shell company he'd used to launder the first payout. She described the accelerated clause he'd exploited, the same structure he'd replicated with Lori, same water staging, same document coercion, same architecture. The only thing he changed was the woman, Rena said. Dunlap looked up from her notes, and the policy amount. He always upgrades. The room was quiet for a moment. I could hear the ventilation system cycling somewhere above the ceiling tiles and the scratch of the court reporter's stylus against the stenotype. Rena sat with her hands flat on the table, palms down, as though she were holding the surface still. I recognized what she'd given them. Not just testimony, a blueprint. The same fraud architecture I'd spent my career dismantling, executed by a man who thought love was a cover story and marriage was an acquisition vehicle. He'd run it twice, refined it, scaled it up. If we hadn't found Lori, he would have run it again. 4 days later, Dunlap called me back to the courthouse. The federal grand jury had returned the indictment. 6 counts: federal interstate wire fraud, insurance fraud, kidnapping, attempted murder, identity theft, conspiracy. 4 counts state, no bail. 6 counts federal, 4 counts state. I read each one in the hallway outside Dunlap's office and felt nothing like satisfaction. Just the heavy, flat relief of a door finally bolted shut. Trial date is set for September, Dunlap said, handing me a copy. And the carrier voided the policy as of yesterday. Fraudulent inducement. The full amount doesn't exist anymore. The engine of the entire scheme, the number that had driven every forged document, every surveillance photo, every night my daughter spent locked in that cabin, was gone. Erased from a ledger. Cyrus's crime had produced nothing. No payout, no silenced victim, no escape. I read the indictment twice in my car in the courthouse parking lot. Every charge, every count, every line of legal language that reduced what he'd done to my family into numbered paragraphs and statutory citations. Then I folded it and put it in the glove box. The rest belonged to the system now. I started the engine. My phone buzzed on the passenger seat. Boyd. I answered and heard the careful tone he used when something had shifted. The surveillance footage from the cabin came back, he said. The woman Lori described, we got a match. Vernon. She's connected to Malcolm Voss. A pause. And Voss isn't the defense attorney. He's a broker. Boyd laid it out for me the next morning. Voss had represented 7 clients in 4 states over the past decade, all facing insurance fraud charges, all using the same accelerated payout structure. He wasn't defending them, he was supplying them. Playbooks, shell companies, exit strategies, a franchise operation dressed in a 3-piece suit. It also explained the leak at the police station. Voss kept a contact inside the department, the same way he kept one everywhere his clients needed him to. The FBI opened a parallel investigation. Cyrus was one branch. The tree was still standing. How many years can a man spend doing work he thinks doesn't matter before the world proves him wrong in the worst possible way? It was a quiet Tuesday in early May. Lori was asleep in the guest room. She slept late most days now, the medication pulling her under until mid-morning. I sat at the kitchen table, sorting through 3 weeks of mail I'd been ignoring. Electric bill, credit card statement, 2 pieces of junk addressed to current resident, and a thick envelope from the insurance carrier whose name I'd stared at on policy documents for the better part of 2 months. I opened it, expecting a final confirmation of the voided policy. The first page was exactly that formal notice. Effective immediately, no payout, no appeal, case closed. Language I could have written myself. But stapled behind the void notice was a second letter, different letterhead, different tone. The carrier's Special Investigations Unit was inviting me to consult on fraud detection specifically, accelerated payout schemes involving staged disappearances. They'd reviewed the case file. They'd spoken with AUSA Dunlap. They wanted someone who could read the patterns the way I'd read Cyrus's. I set the letter on the table and stared at it for a long time. Year after year, I sat behind a desk reading policies. Fluorescent lights, cubicle walls, coffee that tasted like the pot had never been washed. Colleagues who climbed into management while I stayed in claims review because I liked the quiet. My ex-wife, who said insurance was a slow death. My own retirement party, where the cake was store-bought and the card had 6 signatures, and I drove home feeling like I'd spent 32 years in a waiting room for a meeting that never happened. You spend that long reading fine print and you start to believe the world is right that your work doesn't matter. That pattern recognition is just a polite name for stubbornness. Then your daughter's kidnapper writes a policy with a clause you've seen 400 times, and your whole life snaps into focus like a lens you didn't know was blurred. I picked up the letter again and read the consulting terms. The pay was modest. The scope was narrow, reviewing flagged policies, identifying structural fraud indicators, writing assessment briefs, exactly what I'd done for 3 decades. The same work, the same skills, the same man sitting at a desk reading documents other people found tedious. But none of it felt the same. I walked to the living room and stood in front of the bookshelf where I kept my retired investigator credentials in a leather folio I'd never displayed. I'd tucked them behind a row of paperbacks the day I brought them home, embarrassed by a title I thought I hadn't earned. I pulled the folio out and opened it. The badge was small, pewter-colored, unremarkable. The kind of credential no one asks to see. 3 documents on the kitchen counter, now the voided policy confirmation, Lori's hospital discharge papers from the week before, and the consulting offer. 3 proofs that a boring life can be the most dangerous weapon in the room. My ex-wife called it a boring life. Lori was alive because of that boring life. Every clause I'd memorized, every payout structure I'd flagged. Every late-night reading policy amendments that made my eyes ache, all of it had built the exact instinct that recognized what Cyrus was doing before anyone else saw it. A lifetime of preparation for a case I never knew was coming. I picked up my phone and dialed the number on the letterhead. A receptionist answered on the second ring. "This is Vernon Ashford. I'd like to speak with someone about the consulting position. I'm available immediately." The call lasted 4 minutes. They wanted me to start the following Monday. I hung up and set the phone on the counter next to the 3 documents. The kitchen smelled like the coffee I'd brewed an hour ago and forgotten. I poured myself a cup and drank it standing up, tasting it for the first time in weeks, bitter and strong and exactly right. Lori appeared in the kitchen doorway, still half asleep. Her hair pulled back in the loose knot she'd worn since she was a teenager. She saw the letters spread across the counter and picked up the consulting offer. She read it slowly, looked up at me, and smiled. The first real smile since the cabin. Then the smile faded into something more careful. "Dad, there's something else I need to tell you," she said. "About Darcy, about what Cyrus said about her before the wedding." Lori told me what Cyrus had said. 3 months before the wedding, over dinner at a restaurant she couldn't remember the name of. He'd mentioned Darcy by name, asked about her family, her finances, whether she owned property. Lori thought he was being friendly. I called Boyd, and Boyd called Caldwell. Within 48 hours, Darcy Gallagher was under federal protection, and the 4th line on Cyrus's list became evidence in the Voss investigation. She's safe. That thread was closed. The pencil shook in Lori's hand for a full minute before it touched the paper. I stood in the hallway outside the spare bedroom and let her take every second of it. I'd set up the room over the past week, a drafting table from a second-hand store on McDowell, a desk lamp with an adjustable arm, the set of colored pencils Darcy had brought over the previous Sunday. Good light came through the east-facing window in the mornings, and I'd hung a corkboard on the wall so Lori could pin up whatever she made without asking permission. She didn't know I was watching. Her first lines were unsteady, the pencil moving in short, hesitant strokes like someone relearning handwriting after an injury. She wasn't drawing the lake. She wasn't drawing the cabin. She was drawing the view from my front step at dawn, the ridge of Camelback Mountain against a pale sky, the roof line of the neighbor's house, the curve of the street where the mailbox stands. The landscape Cyrus had photographed every morning to control her, she was taking back with her own hand. The lines on the sketch pad were shaky, the way a voice is shaky after someone stops screaming, not weak, just learning to be quiet again. "It's not good," she said without looking up. "It's yours," I told her from the doorway. "That's enough." She kept drawing. After a while, she said, "I think I want to draw the lake eventually. Not yet, but eventually." I nodded and left her alone. That afternoon, I found a letter in the mailbox, no return address, postmarked from Flagstaff. I recognized Rena's handwriting from the document she'd signed at the courthouse, the same deliberate print, each letter formed like she was afraid of being misread. I opened it at the kitchen table. 2 pages, front and back, written in blue ink on lined paper torn from a spiral notebook. She'd gotten a job at a veterinary clinic in Flagstaff front desk, answering phones, scheduling appointments. She was using her real name again. She'd rented a small apartment with a window that faced the mountains, and a landlord who didn't ask questions she couldn't answer. She was learning to exist on paper again, bank account, driver's license, a library card. She said she'd cried over because it had her real name printed on it. The letter ended with a paragraph I read 3 times. "For 7 years, I was a ghost who ate and slept and breathed but didn't exist on paper. You looked at the numbers when everyone else looked away. You didn't just save Lori. You gave me permission to exist again." I folded the letter and set it on the counter next to the consulting offer I'd accepted the week before. 2 documents from 2 women whose lives had intersected with a man who treated people like line items on a balance sheet. Both of them still standing. People ask me what a lifetime of insurance work taught me. I tell them it taught me to read. Not words people. The fine print is always in the people. That evening I sat in my study with the case folder spread across the desk. Phone records, burner numbers, policy documents, phase text analysis, the cabin surveillance photos, the indictment. I read through it one last time, not as a father, but as the claims examiner I'd been for 3 decades. Every page made sense now, every thread connected. The pattern was complete. I closed the folder. Above my desk, pinned to the corkboard I'd bought for Lori but borrowed for the evening, was her shaky desert drawing. Camelback Mountain in colored pencil, the lines uncertain but honest. I looked at it for a long time. I thought about goodbyes. Cyrus wrote one that wasn't real. Rena lived inside one for 7 years. Lori refused to become one. And I spent a career behind a desk, learning to read the difference between what's written and what's true. The most important thing I ever read was a 3-sentence text message that didn't sound like my daughter. Because wasn't. I put the folder in the bottom drawer and closed it. Tomorrow I start the consulting job. Next month, Lori has her first gallery showing since college. Darcy is helping her hang the pieces. In September, Cyrus stands trial. But tonight, the house is quiet. My daughter is asleep down the hall. And for the first time in months, I don't check the locks twice. I check them once. That's enough. And to you listening to my story, remember this. I spent 32 years behind a desk reading fine print while the people around me built louder, flashier lives. I let myself believe that work didn't matter, that quiet diligence was just another word for settling. When my daughter disappeared, I almost let that doubt stop me. I almost trusted the experts and walked away. That would have been the real tragedy, not the crime. But a father too uncertain of his own worth to fight. Some people hear a story like mine and call it a revenge story, a father who got even. But this was never about revenge. This was about paying attention when everyone else looked away. The revenge story people want to hear is the one where the villain suffers. The real story is the one where the quiet person finally trusts what they know. Every skill you've built, every thankless year you've put in, every moment you thought nobody noticed, God sees that work. And I believe He puts us through seasons of preparation so we're ready when the people we love need us most. Your boring life might be the most important thing in someone else's survival. Don't dismiss it. Don't let anyone tell you it was wasted. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment and tell me what part stayed with you the longest. Share this with someone who needs to hear that their quiet work matters. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the very end. It means more than you know. Some details in this story were fictionalized for storytelling and reflection. Any resemblance to real individuals or events is coincidental. The lesson is what I hope you carry with you.